I didn't cry when they told me he was gone. Not in the hospital corridor with its harsh white lights and antiseptic smell. Not when the doctor's lips kept moving, forming words like sudden, massive, nothing more we could do. Not even when I saw his shoes still neatly placed by the door of our apartment, polished the way he liked them, as if he might step into them at any moment and complain that his coffee had gone cold. I cried 43 days later, standing alone in the kitchen at 3 a.m, holding a chipped mug he refused to throw away because it had been a gift from our son when he was 10. That was when the sound finally escaped my chest, raw and animal, as if grief had waited patiently for permission to exist. Until then, I was quiet. Dangerously quiet. People confuse silence with weakness. They think if you are not screaming, you are not thinking. If you are not fighting, you are surrendering. I let them think that. My husband, Daniel Ross, was dead. Founder and CEO of Roswell Group. A man whose name opened doors in 3 continents and closed mouths in boardrooms. A man the press called visionary, ruthless, brilliant. At home, he was the man who forgot where he left his glasses and insisted on watering plants that were already drowning. We were married for 32 years. Long enough to build an empire. Long enough to build habits so intertwined that his absence felt like walking with one shoe missing. The official story was simple. Heart attack. Late night at the office. Too much stress. The unofficial story lived in people's eyes when they looked at me. What will she do now? How long before the company swallows her? How long before the son takes over? Our son Ethan wasted no time answering those questions for them. At the memorial service, held in the glass and marble atrium of Roswell's headquarters, he stood beside me dressed in a black suit that still smelled new. He had Daniel's jawline, Daniel's height, Daniel's confidence. But none of his patience. Executives, investors, politicians, journalists, they all came. Some came to grieve. Most came to observe the transition of power. I stood there, hands folded, nodding when spoken to, saying thank you like a machine programmed for courtesy. Ethan leaned toward me at one point, his voice low, his lips barely moving. "Don't worry, Mom," he said. "I'll take it from here." I looked at him. Really looked. His eyes weren't red. They were bright. Focused. Hungry. He wasn't mourning. He was ascending. Later, when most people had drifted toward the catered tables and soft instrumental music filled the space like a polite lie, he said it out loud. "Tomorrow morning," he said casually, adjusting his cufflinks, "I'll have HR reassign your office. Dad's old assistant too. I want my own team." I said nothing. He took my silence as approval. "You don't need to come in anymore," he added. "I'll make sure you're taken care of financially." "Of course. But, it's time you rested." Rested. A word people use when they want you to disappear without making a mess. "And one more thing," he said, smiling in a way that never reached his eyes. "You should return your company badge. It'll avoid confusion." Confusion. Yes. That would have been terrible. I returned the smile. Soft. Agreeable. Invisible. "Of course," I said. That night, alone in our apartment, I opened the drawer Daniel had always kept locked. He used to joke about it. Just boring legal stuff, he'd say when I raised an eyebrow. He never lied to me. But he didn't tell me everything either. Inside the drawer was a thin black folder, no labels, no markings. Inside the folder was a document I had seen once before years ago, and assumed would never matter. His contingency plan. If something happened to him. If the board turned. If Ethan proved unready. The document was clear. Brutally clear. Daniel Ross had transferred full controlling ownership of Roswell Group to me. Not shared. Not temporary. Full control. Signed. Witnessed. Filed. The board knew. The lawyers knew. Our son did not. Daniel had once said, late at night, after Ethan stormed out of the apartment furious about being contradicted in a meeting, he wants power more than responsibility. I'd laughed then. Nervously. Now, holding that folder, I understood what Daniel had really been doing. He hadn't been preparing for death. He had been preparing for betrayal. The next morning, I did exactly what Ethan expected. I didn't go to the office. I didn't call the board. I didn't send emails or demand meetings. I stayed home. I made tea. I watched the city wake up through the window like nothing had changed. At 9:07 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Badge returned? I replied with a single word. Yes. Another pause. Then good. He thought the game was over. It had barely begun. For weeks, I remained invisible. I declined invitations. Ignored calls. Let the media paint me as the grieving widow retreating gracefully into the background. Meanwhile, Ethan moved fast. Too fast. He replaced department heads. Cut inefficient partnerships. Pushed aggressive expansion strategies Daniel had always refused. He believed numbers were enough. He forgot that numbers are obedient only when people are loyal. Daniel had understood loyalty. He had built Roswell on relationships no spreadsheet could capture. And so had I. I didn't attend board meetings, but I received copies of everything. Quietly. Discreetly. I watched patterns form. I watched Ethan sideline people who asked questions. I watched him elevate those who nodded. And I waited. Because timing, Daniel used to say, is the difference between revenge and justice. The call came on a Thursday evening. Unknown number. I answered. Mrs. Ross, a nervous voice said. This is Claire from legal. We thought you should know. Know what? I asked gently. There's a motion being prepared, she said. Emergency restructuring. They're planning to dilute your shares. I smiled. Too late. Thank you, Claire, I said. You've done the right thing. When I hung up, I took the black folder from the drawer and placed it on the table. Tomorrow, I would go back to the office. Not as a widow. Not as a mother. But as the owner. And Ethan Ross had no idea what was waiting for him when the elevator doors opened. That was only the beginning. The next morning, the city felt different. Not louder. Not faster. Just sharper, like everything had edges again. I dressed carefully, not in black this time. Black invites sympathy. Chose gray. Neutral. Unemotional. The color of people who make decisions. The driver watched me through the rearview mirror as we pulled into the underground garage of Roswell Group. He hesitated before speaking. Good to have you back, ma'am. Back. I nodded, nothing more. The elevator ride was silent except for the hum of cables and my own breathing. 4 years, this ride had been routine. Today, it felt ceremonial. The doors opened onto the executive floor. The first face I saw was Maria, Daniel's longtime assistant. Her eyes widened, just slightly, before she caught herself. Mrs. Ross, she said, standing up so fast her chair rolled back. I didn't know you were coming in today. I didn't either, I said. Until this morning. She swallowed. He's in the boardroom. Of course he was. I walked past her desk without slowing down. The boardroom doors were closed, frosted glass concealing silhouettes inside. Voices bled through, confident, animated, loud. Ethan's voice dominated the room. I didn't knock. I opened the door. Conversations died mid-sentence. 12 faces turned toward me. Some startled. Some annoyed. Some calculating. Ethan stood at the head of the table, one hand braced against the polished surface, a presentation frozen behind him. For a fraction of a second, I saw it. Uncertainty. It vanished quickly. Mom, he said, smiling tightly. This is a board-only meeting. So am I replied. A ripple moved through the room. Ethan laughed, softly, as if indulging a child. You don't need to worry about these things anymore, he said. We've got it handled. Handled. I walked to the empty chair beside Daniel's old seat and sat down. I'm here to listen, I said. Please continue. Ethan hesitated. Just a breath too long. He clicked the remote. The slide changed. Strategic restructuring proposal. I listened. I listened as my son dismantled everything his father had protected. As he talked about excess legacy costs and emotional inefficiencies. As he reduced people I had known for decades to line items. No one spoke up. They never do when they think power has settled. When he finished, the room waited for approval. Ethan turned to me, patronizing calm in his eyes. Any thoughts? I opened my bag and placed the black folder on the table. The sound it made was small. But everyone heard it. I have one, I said. I slid copies of the document toward each board member. Silence followed as pages turned. Eyes widened. Brows furrowed. Breaths caught. Ethan frowned. What is this? He demanded. I looked at him. It's the reason you should sit down, I said. He didn't. What kind of stunt is this? He snapped. You don't have authority. The company lawyer cleared his throat. Actually, he said carefully, she does. The room shifted. This document, the lawyer continued, was executed 5 years ago. It grants Mrs. Ross full controlling interest. Ethan stared at him. That's impossible, he said. Dad would have told me. No, I said quietly. He told me. Anger flooded his face. You planned this, he accused. You waited. Yes, I said. Because you needed to show everyone who you are. The board members avoided his eyes now. Effective immediately, I said, standing, all restructuring proposals are suspended. All executive changes made in the last 30 days are under review. Ethan slammed his hand on the table. You can't do this, he said. I'm your son. I looked at him. And this, I said softly, is business. No one objected. Not one. Ethan left the room without another word, the door closing harder than necessary. The board exhaled. Afterward, as people filed out, Maria approached me. He's furious, she whispered. I know, I said. That afternoon, the phone rang. Ethan. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready for emotion yet. I had work to do. Because power, once revealed, must be used carefully. And Ethan wasn't done fighting. Not even close. By the end of the week, the building had learned my footsteps again. People straightened when I passed. Voices softened. Doors closed a little more carefully. Power doesn't announce itself. It settles. I spent hours in Daniel's old office, not changing a thing. The desk still held the faint scent of his cologne, the bookshelf arranged with the same obsessive precision. He had always believed order was a language. If you controlled the room, you controlled the conversation. I reviewed contracts, emails, old decisions that suddenly made sense in hindsight. Daniel hadn't just prepared for his death. He had prepared for Ethan. Late Friday afternoon, the head of security knocked. Mrs. Ross, he said, uneasy. There's an issue. I didn't look up. Go on. Your son has requested access to the overseas accounts. Singapore, Zurich, Cayman. I closed the file in front of me. And he's claiming executive urgency. I smiled, just barely. Deny it, I said, and escort him out if he insists. The man hesitated. He won't take that well. Neither did I replied. The first 40 years. 10 minutes later, I heard shouting down the corridor. Ethan burst into my office without knocking. You're humiliating me, he said, face flushed, eyes bright with rage. Do you have any idea what this looks like? I finally looked at him. Yes, I said. It looks like accountability. You're freezing me out of my own company. No, y correcta. I'm freezing you out of mine. He laughed sharply. You think the board will back you forever? They're already nervous. They should be, I said. They ignored you once. They won't make that mistake again. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're punishing me because you never mattered to him, he said. You were decoration. Everyone knows it. The words were designed to hurt. They would have, once. I stood. I mattered enough, I said calmly, that he trusted me with everything. That stopped him. You think this is over? He asked. I'll take this public. I'll drag you through the press. I walked past him to the door and opened it. Do, I said. The documents are airtight. But scandals have a way of revealing more than intended. He searched my face, looking for fear. He didn't find it. Security appeared. Ethan didn't resist this time. He just stared at me as they escorted him out. That night, alone in the estate, I poured myself a drink I didn't finish. I thought about the boy he had been, the man he had chosen to become, and the mistake Daniel had made, believing blood was a safeguard. My phone buzzed just after midnight. Unknown number. I answered. Mrs. Ross, a woman's voice said. My name is Claire Whitman. I work in corporate investigations. I think your son has been hiding something. I closed my eyes. Go on, I said. There are transactions, she continued. Unauthorized ones. Shell companies. Someone's been siphoning money out for years. How much? I asked. A pause. Enough, she said, to put him in prison. I thanked her and ended the call. The house was silent. For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt something settle in my chest. Not grief. Resolve. Because Ethan hadn't just underestimated me. He had left fingerprints. And I had spent a lifetime cleaning messes. By Monday morning, the files were no longer just files. They had weight. I sat with Claire Whitman in a quiet conference room 2 floors below the executive offices. No windows. No distractions. Just documents spread across the table like a confession no one had planned to make. 3 years, she said, tapping a column of numbers. Small amounts at first. Carefully disguised. He escalated after your husband's health declined. I didn't react. And the board? I asked. Unaware, she said. Or pretending to be. I nodded. Prepare 2 reports. 1 for legal. 1 for leverage. Claire studied me. Most people choose one. I've learned, I said, that choices are for people without options. By noon, Ethan's allies began calling. Old family friends. Junior executives. People who suddenly remembered my name. I let them talk. I said very little. Silence makes people reveal their fears. At 2:17 p.m., Ethan sent an email. We need to talk. This has gone too far. I forwarded it to legal. At 3:04, the board convened an emergency session. Ethan wasn't invited. They sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact as I laid out the facts. The unauthorized transfers. The shell entities. The falsified approvals. One man cleared his throat. If this goes public. It won't, I said. Unless I decide it should. That ended the discussion. A unanimous vote followed. Suspension of Ethan Ross, effective immediately. Internal investigation pending. No one used the word son. That evening, I drove to the smaller house in Westport. The one Daniel had bought for Ethan when he graduated. I hadn't been there in years. He opened the door himself. He looked smaller. You destroyed me, he said, voice hoarse. No, irraplia. I stopped protecting you. He scoffed. You're enjoying this. I shook my head. I'm surviving it. He stepped aside to let me in. The place was cluttered. Careless. Evidence of a life lived assuming forgiveness was guaranteed. You always resented me, he said. Because Dad chose me. I resented, I said evenly, that you never earned what you demanded. His jaw tightened. What happens now? He asked. That depends, I said, taking a seat. On whether you cooperate. With what? With the truth, I said. And with stepping away. He laughed bitterly. And if I don't? I met his eyes. Then the law gets involved. Fully. Publicly. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he looked away. You won, he muttered. I stood. This was never a competition, I said. It was a reckoning. I left without hugging him. That night, back at the estate, I walked through rooms that once felt like a stage set for someone else's life. For the first time, I rearranged the flowers. Small change. Necessary change. Because power isn't inherited. It's proven. The press smelled blood within days. They always do. It started with a single article, Sterling Reserve Heir Steps Back Amid Internal Review. Neutral words. Polite distance. But between the lines, the implication was clear. Something had cracked. I read it at the kitchen table, morning light cutting across the marble. For decades, I had read headlines about Daniel. about his vision, his discipline, his brilliance. Now they were finally learning how fragile empires become when built on assumption. By midweek, the calls shifted tone. Not what's happening, but what do you want to happen? I met with legal every day at 8. I met with operations at 10. I walked the floors at noon. I learned names I had once been encouraged to forget. People noticed. Not because I was kind. Because I was present. Claire confirmed what I already knew. Ethan had agreed to cooperate. Not out of remorse. Out of fear. The settlement was quiet. No charges. Full restitution. A permanent exit from Sterling Reserve and any affiliated entities. The board wanted closure. I wanted clarity. On the 40th day after Daniel's death, I returned to the parlor. The lilies were gone. The perfume had faded. The house felt lighter. I sat in the same armchair. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I thought about the man I had loved. The man I had outgrown. The silence I had mistaken for loyalty. Grief doesn't end. It evolves. That afternoon, I made one final decision. I dissolved the old structure. Sterling Reserve would continue, but differently. Transparent governance. Independent oversight. No family seats by default. The announcement shook the industry. Some called it betrayal. Others called it visionary. I didn't correct them. Because legacies aren't preserved by clinging. They're preserved by change. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. I didn't know who you were. I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied. Neither did I. I turned the phone face down. The house was quiet. Not the hollow quiet of loss. The earned quiet of truth. And for the first time in 40 years, the future belonged to me. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Sterling Reserve, catching the dust motes that danced lazily above the polished oak floors. Maya walked through the corridors with deliberate calm, her steps echoing softly against the walls. The building smelled of old paper, polished wood, and faint traces of chocolate, Victor's lingering signature on the company he had built. Each familiar scent, each familiar sound, reminded her of the life she and Victor had created together, and each reminded her why she would never let it fall into careless hands. Grant's arrogance had already begun to fade, replaced by hesitation. He moved through the office like a man uncertain of where he belonged, brushing past employees who whispered nervously, glances cast between one another, wondering if the new owner Maya would return today. She was here, and she was watching. Not from the shadows, but openly. Her presence was a quiet storm, one that promised upheaval without a single word being spoken. Her first stop was the conference room. The chairs were arranged exactly as Victor had once positioned them for his morning briefings. She ran her fingers along the polished table, remembering the discussions, the debates, the laughter, and the quiet victories achieved there. She thought of every small gesture, every handshake, every nod exchanged in these walls that had forged alliances spanning continents. Today, the table would witness not just memories but the assertion of authority long denied to her. She called a meeting of all department heads. Their expressions were wary, shoulders tensed. Each of them had known Victor, each had respected Maya quietly behind his back. Now they waited for her words, uncertain if the soft, dignified woman they had admired would continue to mourn or if she would rise to claim her place fully. Maya entered with a quiet grace, her eyes meeting each one of them in turn. The silence was deep, almost tangible. As of today, she began, her voice calm and unwavering, I am taking office as the Chief Executive Officer of the Sterling Reserve. Any directives issued by my son, Grant Holloway, are void and must be disregarded. The words fell like stones in a still pond, rippling across the room. Heads nodded cautiously, relief and respect mingling in their expressions. They had known, all along, that Maya was not a woman to underestimate. Next, she summoned her legal team. Papers were signed, orders issued, and protective measures put in place. Any attempt by Grant or Arthur to interfere with company operations would now be met with immediate legal action. Maya had anticipated their every move, and the mechanism was complete. Each safeguard reinforced the foundation Victor had built, protecting it from those who would desecrate it for selfish gain. The first true challenge came in the form of an urgent email from a prominent supplier in France. Maya opened it with calm composure. The tone was cautious, wary, yet there was an unmistakable thread of loyalty woven into the carefully chosen words. They would continue their partnership, but only under her terms, only because they trusted the integrity and history of the company, and now its rightful owner. Similar messages arrived from Belgium, Sri Lanka, and Italy. One by one, the threads of Victor's network held fast, stronger than ever, resilient against the storm of greed and betrayal. By the afternoon, Maya found herself standing in front of Grant's former office. The room, meticulously arranged by him in his vision of a modern empire, seemed almost comically empty, the air thick with arrogance that had long since dissipated. She opened the blinds, letting sunlight pour into the space, and ran her hand along the desk where Grant had once sat. This had been his kingdom for 2 brief, misguided days. Now it was hers, not to dominate, but to honor. Grant and Arthur were nowhere to be found. Rumors whispered through the office suggested frantic calls, attempts at reconciliation, and rising panic. Maya didn't need confirmation. The silence, the absence of the instigators, spoke volumes. They had underestimated her, underestimated the intricate web of respect and loyalty that Victor and Maya had built over decades. Her final act for the day was the symbolic restoration of Victor's portrait in the executive study. She placed it carefully, adjusting the frame until it was perfect, until it looked at her as it always had, wise and approving. Standing back, she allowed herself a small private smile. Not one of triumph, but of quiet satisfaction, of alignment with the principles she and Victor had always cherished. Maya's victory was not in humiliation, nor in anger. It was in the restoration of balance, in the reaffirmation that a legacy built on integrity, respect, and human connection cannot be shattered by arrogance or greed. The company breathed again, alive with the energy of those who understood what it meant to be part of something greater than themselves. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Maya walked the quiet streets around the Sterling Reserve. The lights of the office glowed softly, windows reflecting the last hues of daylight. She thought of her son, of the betrayal, and of the delicate line between justice and revenge. The city buzzed with life, indifferent to the battles fought within her office walls, yet each person she passed was unknowingly connected to the web she had so carefully tended. Tomorrow, there would be more work. New initiatives, new products, new meetings. The business world was relentless, and Maya knew the day would not end with one victory. But for the first time in years, she felt the weight of grief lift slightly. She carried it still, as one carries memory, but it no longer paralyzed her. Victor's legacy was safe, and her own authority was quietly, fully established. And somewhere in the night, far from her eyes, Grant Holloway and Arthur Vance would begin to understand the consequences of their actions. They had thought to play a game, to seize power through manipulation and lies. But they had played it in a house already ruled by loyalty, trust, and invisible threads stronger than any contract. Their defeat was not a matter of chance, it was inevitability. Maya Holloway returned to her home that night, the estate silent and reverent. She lit a candle in Victor's memory, letting the flame flicker gently in the dim light. It was a ritual, yes, but also a promise. The Sterling Reserve would thrive. Not because of spreadsheets, not because of shortcuts, not because of fleeting ambition. It would thrive because it was built on honor, and because she, Maya, would ensure it remained unbroken. She closed her eyes and allowed herself one long, deep breath. The work was far from over. But tonight, victory tasted quiet, steady, and just. And tomorrow, the world would see not just the preservation of a company, but the emergence of Maya Holloway, strong, wise, and unshakable. The next morning, the Sterling Reserve buzzed with quiet efficiency. Employees moved through the halls with renewed confidence, sensing the invisible shift in authority. Maya walked among them, acknowledging greetings with a nod, a brief smile, a subtle gesture of reassurance. There was no grand announcement, no speech meant to impress. The presence of the rightful owner was more than sufficient. Every handshake, every shared glance carried weight, and the atmosphere felt lighter, yet charged with expectation. She entered the procurement department first. The screens glowed with data, numbers and graphs meticulously maintained by teams who now looked to her not just for orders, but for guidance. Maya understood that the foundation of a company lay not only in strategy but in people, their trust, their loyalty, their understanding of what they were protecting. She spoke to the managers directly, calmly, but with an unmistakable authority. "Every partnership we have cultivated is a promise," she said. "Not just a contract. Honor them, respect them, and protect them as you would your own name. That is our greatest strength. In the legal office, papers had been prepared for auditing, compliance, and verification of all contracts. Maya reviewed every document, signing where needed, questioning where ambiguity lingered. She moved with deliberate precision, her mind analyzing every clause, every commitment. She could not afford mistakes, not now, not after the betrayal she had endured. The work demanded patience, foresight, and an intimate understanding of both the law and the people who had entrusted their livelihoods to the Sterling Reserve. Meanwhile, in a small sunlit corner of the building, Charlotte arrived from Brussels. She carried with her the quiet reassurance of friendship and alliance. Maya met her in the courtyard, where the roses, now freshly pruned, stood as silent witnesses to the day's beginning. They embraced briefly, not in dramatics, but in a shared understanding of the battles fought and the victories earned. Charlotte's eyes reflected respect and relief. "You've done what so few could, Maya," she whispered. "You've reclaimed everything without destroying it." Maya smiled faintly. "It was never about destruction," she replied. "It was about protection. About showing that loyalty and integrity are not just ideals, they are power." Together, they walked through the gardens, discussing plans for partnerships, new products, and restoring trust with suppliers. Each conversation was a careful blend of diplomacy and strategy, the kind Victor had once excelled at, now carried forward by her steady hand. In the executive suite, Maya opened the vault containing decades of company records, photographs, letters, and contracts. She sifted through them with reverence. Each paper told a story, each image captured a moment, each signature represented trust extended and honored. It was a history not of money alone, but of relationships, of people who had believed in Victor and by extension in Maya. She carefully catalogued everything, ensuring that the legacy would endure, protected not only legally but in memory and practice. Then came the final, unavoidable confrontation. Grant Holloway, having been informed of his exile and the company's restored order, returned to the estate. His expression was a mixture of resentment, desperation, and a flicker of hope that he could still manipulate, that perhaps he could undo what he had caused. He found Maya in the garden, her hands in the soil, tending the new blooms. "Mom," he began, voice tense and faltering. "You have nothing to say that matters, Grant," Maya interrupted, not lifting her gaze from the roses. "You believed this company could be sold like merchandise. You believed loyalty and trust could be disregarded. You were wrong." He stepped closer, his hands trembling, not from exertion but from the realization that his mother's calm was impenetrable, that her authority was unshakable. "I made mistakes," he admitted finally, desperation breaking through his pride. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "You were doing exactly what I warned you against," Maya said quietly, still methodical in her pruning. "You chose greed over honor. And now you must live with the consequences." Arthur Vance remained at a distance, silent, a shadow of arrogance now replaced with fear. Maya did not spare him a glance. His presence was irrelevant. The outcome had already been determined. The world he had tried to manipulate had refused to bend. Maya rose slowly, placing the shears carefully in the basket. She turned fully to face her son, her gaze steady and unwavering. "You are no longer an officer of this company," she said. "You are no longer welcome in these halls. You have 1 hour to collect your belongings and leave. Any attempt to interfere with operations will be met with immediate legal action." Grant's face paled, his eyes darting toward the building as if searching for an escape route. There was no escape, not from her words, not from the authority she wielded with quiet precision. He had gambled and lost, and the rules were now clear. "You will leave, Grant," she said again, her voice a mixture of sadness and resolve. "Not because I do not love you, but because love does not mean allowing betrayal to thrive. Learn from this. Grow from it. But do not return until you have earned it through respect, integrity, and understanding of what it means to carry a legacy responsibly." For a moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, with a mixture of shame and reluctant acceptance, he nodded. Without a word he turned, leaving the garden, leaving the estate, leaving the authority of the Sterling Reserve firmly in Maya's hands. The afternoon passed in quiet order. Maya returned to her office, reviewing product lines, supplier relations, and ongoing negotiations. She spoke with Charlotte, Mr. Sundaram, and Psy Lauren, ensuring that the network of trust Victor had built remained unbroken. Each conversation, each decision, was a careful reinforcement of the values that had brought the Sterling Reserve to life. By evening, she walked through the tasting room, inhaling the familiar aroma of chocolate, tea, and fine confections. The jars of her first personal recipe, the Charlotte, sat on the table, symbols not only of friendship but of renewed purpose. Employees, seeing her there, understood that leadership had returned to a steady rightful hand. The company breathed with her presence, its pulse strong and sure. Maya Holloway paused by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The city outside moved at its relentless pace, indifferent to the battles fought within these walls. Yet she knew that the quiet victories, the restoration of honor and legacy, mattered more than the noise of commerce, more than fleeting power or wealth. And in that moment, she understood fully, the Sterling Reserve was not merely a company. It was a testament, a living tribute to trust, integrity, and the enduring strength of those who honored it. Maya Holloway had claimed her place, and the world would respect it, not through fear, but through recognition of the values she upheld. The next morning, Maya arrived at the Sterling Reserve early, before the city had fully woken. The air was crisp, carrying a faint scent of coffee and the distant river. She walked through the empty halls with deliberate steps, each echo a reminder of the silent authority she now held. The portraits of Victor, once dusty and overlooked, now greeted her like old friends, their eyes seeming to approve of the work she had begun. She touched the frame of his portrait gently, whispering a small private acknowledgement. She had not only preserved his legacy, she had honored it, and now it would live on under her stewardship. Employees trickled in, hesitant at first, unsure of what to expect from the new CEO. But Maya's presence was calm and commanding. She did not speak in grandiose statements or promises. She moved among them, acknowledging their work, listening to their concerns, and offering guidance where needed. Every action reinforced her role, not just as the owner of the company, but as a guardian of the values Victor had instilled. Charlotte arrived once more, this time to stay for several days, assisting with the complex negotiations and planning that lay ahead. Together, they pored over contracts, supplier lists, and pending orders. There were moments of frustration, challenges that seemed insurmountable, yet each time Maya faced them with clarity and patience. The company was not merely surviving, it was learning to thrive under her vision. A letter arrived from the lawyer, confirming that Arthur Vance's fraudulent activities had been documented and were ready to be submitted for investigation. Maya read through the details, noting the thoroughness with which every irregularity had been recorded. Justice, she realized, was not swift or dramatic, it was precise, calculated, and inevitable. Arthur would answer for his betrayal, but the Sterling Reserve would continue to operate unscathed, its foundation stronger for having exposed the corruption within. Grant Holloway remained absent, though his absence was not unnoticed. Maya did not dwell on anger or resentment. She knew that his punishment was not merely exile but a necessary lesson. She had given him the harshest gift a mother could offer, the opportunity to understand the weight of betrayal, and the distance required to learn from it. In time perhaps he would return, not to the position he once sought, but to a new understanding of responsibility, respect, and loyalty. Maya's first personal project as CEO was a new product line inspired by the international friends and partners who had supported the Sterling Reserve through its darkest hours. Small, exquisite jars of pear and cinnamon preserves, delicately spiced and perfectly balanced, were produced under her supervision. Each batch carried not only quality ingredients but the intention of human care, respect, and collaboration. It was a product of legacy and friendship, a symbol that business could be both profitable and principled. The launch of the Charlotte was a quiet affair. Friends, suppliers, and long-standing partners gathered in the tasting room, marveling at the delicacy, but more so at the unity and renewed spirit of the company. Charlotte, Mr. Sundaram, and Psy Lauren toasted quietly, their expressions reflecting pride and admiration for Maya. She spoke only a few words. This is more than a recipe. It is a promise, to honor our partners, to respect our history, and to continue building something lasting and meaningful. Days turned into weeks, and the Sterling Reserve began to hum with life once more. Maya implemented systems to strengthen supplier relations, improve operational efficiency, and nurture the talents of her employees. She did not seek to dominate, but to guide, fostering an environment where integrity and excellence were inseparable. Maya's office, once a space of memory and reflection, became the nerve center of innovation and collaboration. She spent hours reviewing proposals, consulting with Charlotte and other trusted advisors, and carefully balancing tradition with modern demands. The employees noticed the difference immediately. Decisions were made with thoughtfulness, communication was clear, and morale soared. The Sterling Reserve was no longer just a company, it was a living testament to human values intertwined with business acumen. On a quiet evening, Maya walked once more through the garden. The roses, now fully bloomed, stretched toward the fading sunlight, resilient and beautiful. She paused to admire them, feeling the satisfaction of both completion and continuation. Her journey had been one of struggle, confrontation, and decisive action, but it had also been one of growth, understanding, and renewal. She thought of Victor, of his dedication, and of the countless hours spent building something far greater than wealth. She thought of Grant, of his failings and his potential for redemption. She thought of Arthur, whose arrogance and deceit had been exposed and whose consequences were now unavoidable. And she thought of herself, not merely as a widow or a successor, but as a leader, a guardian, and a creator of enduring legacy. The Sterling Reserve had survived betrayal, greed, and manipulation. It had endured because it had been built on more than contracts or profit margins. It had been built on honor, loyalty, and trust. Maya Holloway had not only saved the company, she had restored its soul. As night settled over the estate, she returned to her office, reviewing the plans for the coming months. Expansion, product innovation, and global partnerships awaited. But tonight, there was no rush. Tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. The garden outside was silent except for the gentle rustle of leaves, and the city lights shimmered in the distance. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling the scent of roses, chocolate, and tea, feeling the pulse of the company in harmony with her own. Maya Holloway had claimed her rightful place, not through aggression, not through fear, but through unwavering principle. She had faced betrayal, confronted ambition, and emerged not only victorious but enlightened. The legacy of the Sterling Reserve was secure, and its future bright. She smiled softly, knowing that the work would never truly end, but understanding that she was ready for every challenge ahead. The soul of the company, and of her family's name, was safe, nurtured, and flourishing. And with that, Maya Holloway, the quiet force of resilience and integrity, turned off the office lights and walked through the gardens one final time, ready to embrace the promise of tomorrow.